Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about returning to the workplace after this global crisis, which of course is on a lot of our minds at the moment. Expecting the webinar today to last no more than 45 minutes, and of course we'll send you a recording through afterwards. If you've got any questions as we go, please add them to the Q&A box, which is at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on which kind of computer you're on, and then we'll try and answer them as we go. But if we can't through the webinar, we'll get to them at the end when we have time for a Q&A section. As always, with one of Instant Impact's webinars, we're going to follow it up with a feedback form, and we'd really appreciate if you do take the time to fill that in. It's incredibly helpful to us. Getting the feedback, understanding how we can improve, and also about the content that you're interested in hearing about in the future. Well, I'm sure that everyone here is looking forward to hearing from our speakers today as much as I am. We've got two expert practitioners with us today. We've got Sanctus, who are co-hosting the webinar with us today, and they provide mental health coaches to their clients. Ben Graham, who's their head of coaching, is going to answer our questions on how we can support mental health during these turbulent times. We're also lucky enough to have Jodie Crawford, the head of people at Red Bull, who's going to run us through how they're approaching the return to the workplace, as well as how they've been dealing with COVID over the last few months. But I'm going to kick us off by framing the challenge that we've got ahead of us, getting everyone back into the workplace. But first, let me just quickly introduce Instant Impact for those of you who don't know us. We're internal recruitment specialists, and we provide our clients with the right people, marketing, technology, and also strategy to have high-performing internal recruitment functions. The relationships we have are embedded and long-term, so they lead to regular conversations around the future of talent, the skills, future skills, and also, of course, workplace dynamics. So throughout this crisis, we've been helping our clients and also our community to navigate the realities of this new world of work that's forming around us. So we started off looking at remote working, remote onboarding, and of course, remote recruitment. That's evolved into a conversation around global workforce planning, and following the Black Lives Matter, well, before Black Lives Matter, but spurred on by it, we're doing a lot of work with our clients at the moment around diversity. That's a whole nother topic, but I will drop I think Frankie, who's joined me on the call today, is going to drop a link to our diversity hub. We've actually made open and free all of our methodology on how to drive diversity within a workforce, something that we're really proud of. Anyway, whilst the challenge of returning to the workplace might feel less scary than the panic of leaving it, I really want to make sure that we don't underestimate the degree to which this crisis has affected us as individuals and as companies. And I know that that's a theme that's going to run through the other two sections of the webinar today. So in preparing for what people are dubbing a sort of a return to the new normal, it's really important that we recognize that in the months since March, we have changed a huge amount. There's going to be a long-lasting mark left on us all. So since lockdown began at Instant Impact, we've been speaking to hundreds of companies, and they've all got different opinions on how COVID will change the workplace. We've sort of distilled it into the way that we look at it, and we think that it's not, as some people are saying, the death of the office, the end of things as they were before, but it's certainly, we're not expecting to see a return to how we were working before March. And specifically, we think that remote working and increased flexibility are two things that are really here to stay. And that has results on how people are planning for a return to what the workplace is. So there are a whole host of challenges that different companies are going to face. There are far too many, and they're far too granular for me to cover all of them here today, but there are 4 that we've identified that most companies will face and that I wanted to focus on today. So there's reintegration, reboarding, redeployment, and retaining the positives. Lots of re's. I'm going to start with running through reintegration. Now, this out of all of them might sound like a bit of a strange one at first, but when you consider how different the individual experiences that we've all had of this crisis, it might become clear how far we might have drifted away from one another. So take the experience that 4 different people that might work at your organization might have had over COVID, and think about the different challenges that they would have faced. So first of all, your furloughed workers, they might be coping with feelings of rejection, worrying that they'll be the first to be made redundant. Some might have been going out of their minds with boredom and jealous of their co-workers who've been able to keep working. And others might have loved the slower pace of life and the reduced pressure. They might be reassessing whether they want to go back to the same job as they had before the crisis. The other thing to consider is that their last experience of work was what it was like to be in the office in March. And that's a far cry in a lot of cases away from what they'll be going back to and what we're experiencing at the moment. Then look at your remote workers. Those who've been working remotely might well be resentful of those who have been furloughed. You know, how come I've been slogging my guts out while they've been looking at their colleagues on social media, spending time in the garden, for example. Your remote workers might well be burnt out. A lot of us haven't been taking the holiday that we should have done since the start of the year. And I know that's doubly true for those with small children. They've been parent, teacher, as well as employee throughout all of this period. There are some people who remained in the office, the key workers. They had no choice but to keep going in. They might be feeling undervalued, underprotected. Why should they be the ones taking the risk? And then finally, whilst most businesses have been on hiring freezes, there are some that have continued to recruit. So new joiners, they've never seen the office. They've never met any of their colleagues face to face in many cases. And they've been almost robbed of those first few weeks and months that are usually so critical for building friendships and relationships in a new job. So these employees, they might feel a bit out of place. They might feel a bit worried about going back to going to an office that they fear they might not fit into. So the results of these starkly different experiences is that some workplaces have seen 2, 3, or maybe even 4 different groups or subcultures emerging. And so even if you had the strongest culture and you were really proud of it before lockdown, it's unlikely to return to how it was unless you put some real effort in. So we've identified 4 steps that businesses can take to start rebuilding this culture and reintegrating their teams back into the organization. So first of all is just to prepare for the challenge and really take the time to plan out the return to work in advance. I always think that for a project like this, it makes sense to have someone dedicated to the project and have them plan backwards, team by team, day by day from day 1 and probably into month 6. There's also obviously a huge amount of planning to do for health and safety. I'm not going to go into that today because there are organizations and experts that are better placed for that. I think we are going to share the government guidance in the chat and also links to our HR Advisors Peninsula and the Federation of Small Businesses as well. And I've already seen some really good guidance coming out from those organizations. The other area that companies can look at is peer-to-peer communication. Encouraging your team to share the experience that they've had over lockdown and the challenges that they've faced, and as well as how they're feeling about returning to a workplace. We always find with these things that resentment and frustrations quickly melt away with better understanding of colleagues. Third, there's the opportunity to lead from the front. More than ever, your culture will be defined by your leaders. So ensure that your executive team really take a lead in demonstrating the behaviors that you'd expect of any employees. Many leadership teams have been more visible than ever during lockdown, so it could just be a question of continuing that following your return to the office. And the final element I wanted to talk about here around rebuilding culture is to retain the empathy and flexibility that many businesses have shown and in some cases really developed during lockdown. Now, I know we're all tired of Zoom, albeit this is a Zoom webinar, but one of the amazing things that it's demonstrated and provided us with is a window into one another's lives. More than ever before, we're aware of the individual personal circumstances of people. So keep that going when discussing a return to work, because some different personal situations really will inform different opinions and different concerns on the way back in. So the other big new challenge that I wanted to discuss today is how to reboard employees who have been on furlough. Now, I know that some companies didn't furlough people, but for those of us that did, it's a really important thing to consider. So a lot of us on this webinar, we work in and around HR, and we've been lucky enough to be working through coronavirus. So before we think about how to approach this next step as in our organization, it's important to take a minute to step back and realize how much we've changed and how much we've learned during this period, because those coming back from furlough will probably not have undergone as extreme a shift. So it's up to us to train and educate them to give them the best chance of success without coming across as patronizing. So having worked over the last 4 months, we're all 100% comfortable with remote working. But before COVID, only 5% of the working population actually regularly work from home. So this is an element of working life that at Instant Impact we expect to survive lockdown. So really make sure that those coming back from furlough are trained in how to use video conferencing, and as well as how to use any remote collaboration software that you've implemented that your remote workers will be very used to by now. There are also some soft skills that we'll have picked up over lockdown: how to manage and be managed remotely, how to build rapport with clients and colleagues remotely. So really have a think about what new elements have come into the workplace and how to train people to deal with them. I'd recommend using the same methods that you would when onboarding a new hire. So establish a buddy system, run classroom training, have them shadow their colleagues, and that will let them pick up the new elements that we've learned and also relearn the old elements that they might be a bit rusty on after four months of not working. And during this reboarding period, it might be a good idea, it might not be for you, depending on the different organization, but it might be an idea to remove or reduce targets for the first couple of months to remove pressure and allow your teams to get up to speed. So whether you've had people on furlough or not, many companies that we're talking to are finding that having gone through the biggest digital transformation in the last 30 years, they're now needing new and different skill sets within the organization. So we've seen many companies adopting technology out of necessity. So a great example of that's Funding Circle, who have automated credit approval for CBILS. But interestingly, that's a job that would normally have been done broadly manually by credit analysts. So they've essentially automated away headcount. For a less high-tech example, but just as relevant, we see companies that have continued to sell successfully their products and services in a remote world, whereas previously they relied on field sales teams. So without the need to drive or travel to meet their clients, these jobs have become significantly more efficient. So one salesperson can do the appointments of 3 or 4 different salespeople. Again, potential reduction in required headcount there. And then finally, companies have also ensured that they've got no latent capacity. So furloughing employees have forced others to pick up the slack. And so there's a concern in some businesses that even if the levels of work remain to the same as they were pre-lockdown, there might be employees left without work to do. So companies are left with a choice of whether to make redundancies or whether to retain retain talent within the business by redeploying team members. So I'm going to focus on the latter. Recommend by starting to map out the opportunities that are immediately available within the organization, but also have a look at the upcoming skills gaps within the business. The best way of doing this is to look at your business plan and to build a detailed talent plan alongside it. So just a few examples would be, if your business plan calls for an increased focus on online sales and marketing channels, you might need a new CRM manager or a new social media manager or a new sales exec. If you've decided to keep remote working in the organization, it's really likely there'll be an additional strain on IT. So they're now working across hundreds of different tiny sites in people's houses rather than one big corporate site. So they may well need some extra hands, and perhaps you need to grow your HR function to provide that support and pastoral care to your team in these times of uncertainty. But regardless of what those opportunities are, and where they are in the organization, the next step is really quite similar to a recruitment campaign. So you're essentially looking for a skill set match between existing employees and opportunities within the business. Now, as tempting as it is, we'd recommend against just moving people around from old role to new role. The employees should demonstrate a desire for the new role by applying to the vacancy and also interviewing for it. And if you get this right, it can be a really fantastic way of keeping your brightest and most ambitious talent within the organization rather than having to bring in someone new. And there's an additional benefit that having lateral movement between teams can be a great method of sharing knowledge across different departments. the other benefit is that the whole workforce will respect the effort that you're making as a business to keep people within employment and within the business. So just one more element from me, and that's encouraging businesses to keep some of the positive changes that you might have made over lockdown on return to the workplace. So I've already mentioned that at Instant Impact, we think that remote working is really here to stay, and you can really take advantage of that. So we've seen companies reducing their office space and use the saved money to double down on L&D and investment in their employees. We're also seeing many of our clients looking to retain specific roles as completely remote so that they can access new talent pools. So for example, the mentally and physically handicapped who might not find it easy to travel, working parents who might appreciate the additional flexibility, and finally, employees all over the world. So it's really interesting to know that a sales executive in Cape Town has an average salary of £7,500, well, compared to the equivalent in the UK where it's £23,000. There's some really interesting opportunities there, and that's the same time zone, same language, same skill set. So I really encourage everyone to keep looking for great technology that allows you to improve remote productivity and remote engagement. Keep asking your team what they think, what they want to keep, what they want to go back to. And I think the last few months have seen companies take impressive strides to be more empathic to their employees, more flexible, building their online presence, having more visible CEOs, and thinking really hard about culture. And when we're all back to the new normal, just keep it up. And I think we'll live in a happier, healthier, and potentially even more productive workplace. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce Ben Graham, who has offered to answer any of our questions that we have on how lockdown and the return to the workplace will affect our mental health specifically. So if you've got any questions for Ben, please do pop them in the Q&A box. Ben, before you go, I just wanted to say I think Sanctus is going to play a really important role in supporting people's mental health over the coming months and years. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
Oh, absolutely. So what do you think the new mental health challenges are going to be? What have you seen cropping up or increasing as a result of COVID?
Well, if I were to sort of be a bit cheeky about it, I'd say that one of the best things about mental health and the field is that it's all the same problem showing up in slightly different ways. So obviously the COVID situation has been one of the most dramatic shocks to our collective system that any of us can remember. And so really what we've seen is just an increase in the intensity and frequency of things that people will already know are the things that people struggle with. So there's already been massive increases in the levels of stress, anxiety, depression. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to anyone to know that people's experience of loneliness has gone up massively. For people who tend to drink or use drugs, that use has gone up. I think the thing that maybe is not getting as discussed as regularly, but seems to be in the background for lots of people. I'm speaking personally in my experience of working with individuals, but also what kind of you hear in networks of coaches and therapists and clinical psychologists, is that we talk about things like Zoom fatigue, and I'm sure lots of us have had the experience of riding waves of maybe feeling very low or finding it hard to kind of keep going. I think there's a huge amount of grief around. So there will be people who have lost people and people will have died, but also all of us have lost a world that we knew. And that response is kind of happening in slow motion for most people. And it's been my experience that people are underestimating the amount of kind of work they're doing in the background to adjust to my old life, and what I knew is gone and I don't know what's going to take its place. And then that can show up in various sorts of different ways, like anxiety or experiences of depression, or, even for some people working unbelievably hard and then sort of realizing, wait, what am I doing with all this time? I've heard a lot of people say kind of anecdotally, well, I feel like I'm working really, really hard, but I have no idea on what. I would have thought that working from home and not commuting, I would have more time, but people are finding they have less.
Yeah.
And so, I don't actually know that that response is going to change going back to the office. It may do because people may feel temporarily kind of calmed, but I think that's something that we're not talking about so much as a society and in offices, because it's difficult to talk about grief.
It is, and I'm really interested. A couple of the words that you've used and feelings that you've described, grief and loneliness, were two that really stood out to me. I think in both cases would generally be considered by society and by all of us to be deeply personal.
Yeah.
What's the line that we as HR professionals or mental health professionals or business owners, where's the line that the right line to tread there in supporting our team?
So I think the first thing to say, if I kind of think off the top of my head about that one, is that people will be feeling very unsafe. And so I think that one thing that falls on this, if we're thinking about a line that we can do, and I would encourage people to do, is to try to invite people to share some of their experience if they feel comfortable. So that may be starting to use check-ins, for example, in meetings, just carving out a little bit of time at the start of a meeting to say what you're experiencing today, or anything that you need maybe your colleagues to know about, without any pressure to say more than you want to, but to kind of create an experience of people of understanding that we can't separate. As we've talked about this before, but I think coronavirus has really illuminated it. You can't really separate someone's personal experience from what they bring to work. And perhaps to kind of familiarize yourself with signs of kind of mounting stress. So if you have a sense of somebody is really breaking their back unnecessarily, or you're starting to see them behave in ways that if you feel are unusual, I don't think it's kind of HR professionals or leaders' responsibility to know how to intervene to change that, but perhaps to familiarize yourself with warning signs. And then, if you have services in place in your workplace, or partnerships with therapists, with services like Sanctus and coaches, to say, I wonder if now might be a time when it'd be important to go talk to somebody, because it seems like something's going on for you. And every workplace will have its own culture, where that line will get defined with each individual as well. So I'm not sure I can offer like a comprehensive answer on that one.
I think you did, to be honest with you. But, so obviously, I think when we were speaking in advance of this webinar, you used a phrase, and I don't want to misquote you to your face, but I think you said that over lockdown, we've been in a lot of companies that you've been speaking to are in, or that we've all seen are in survival mode, and we're very, very reactive. And obviously, we're faced with this opportunity now, and we're thinking about a return to the workplace where we can plan in advance and we can think for the future. Are there any specific issues that you imagine will become more prevalent on the return to work? And second part of the question is, what can we do to support and reduce those?
Sure. I think that as much as people may be, and we are, even as we talk about this in this webinar, we're talking about a return to work. I noticed this morning that I'm reading things in the news about rising cases in Europe, for example. So I think that what we're trying to do for ourselves as a society is kind of say, this is what's going to happen now. Like, even in the phrase new normal is this, I think, a wish for normality. So whilst I kind of hope that there is greater stability, and I really have the sense of people wanting to provide that for their people, I think we have to be honest with each other about, we've been through a massive disruption and there may be more disruption to come, because our nervous systems will be feeling the instability even if we say this is what we're going to do now. So I think the best thing we can do is be clear about, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and to provide as much predictability as we can without saying things that we can't stand by. So if it's possible to provide updates as frequently as you can to employees, even if it's to say there isn't any more to say right now, but to allow like some sense of every Thursday you hear from your managers about this, or something like that. People are craving so much stability and predictability right now that I think that would be really fundamental to giving some sense that people know what is required. even if we can't give any certainty.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess the other element of the return to the work is return to the workplace.
Yeah.
How about, and I think maybe for the first time since the beginning of the or before lockdown, people are having to travel into work, and some people might be very worried about getting sick, getting ill. What are your thoughts on what effect that will have on our employees, and again, what we can do about it?
Yeah. So I think the main thing to say there is that, again, this is really about people's feeling of safety, about how safe and their ability to sort of feel calm in themselves. And what's really interesting about safety for us, like kind of neurobiologically, is that it doesn't actually matter whether there's a danger or not. People can be very, very anxious in the absence of any real threat. Actually, health anxiety in general is often that, aside from COVID. And of course, it's easy then when there's plenty of news about a virus to latch onto that to say, oh, I'm really in danger. But actually, it's not really a health worry. It's a worry. It's an anxiety problem. And I would imagine there will actually be some benefits to coming into the office. The commute, I imagine, would be really anxiety provoking. But for many people, not all people, but for many people, being around other people, being able to see their face and hear their voice may already be soothing. And I suppose the one sort of, I guess, piece of practical advice to employers is to remember that someone feeling safe is kind of negotiated. You can't say to them, don't worry, you're safe. And there needs to be a bit of a dialogue of like, okay, so what's the worst part? What's the most difficult bit? What's getting you most anxious? And what's in our power to change? And being open to, I guess, hearing from people how you can support them. I think that's the key thing, is feeling like that conversation is allowed, rather than we have to know how to help you or you need to tell us what to do. There needs to be like an ongoing negotiation, basically.
Absolutely, and I think that actually goes sort of. We had a question while you were talking from Emma Brooks here, who's asked what employers can do to encourage conversations on mental health at work more generally, to get people to start thinking about it so that they can proactively manage it. I know that's a big part of the work that you do at Sanctus.
Sure. I think that one way I think I've already mentioned is to take a bit of time in meetings, usually at the start and at the end, to invite people to say something. One interesting way to do it is to kind of invite people to check in. People will say a little bit about how they're doing, and then to do a second round of check-in where you say, don't say anything that you said the first time, and see if you can take a little bit more of a risk. And usually then people come forward a bit more with maybe what's happening for them at a personal level, as long as people don't feel that there is pressure to share, but an invitation. And they also feel that they are kind of being met. So that also means that leaders and people kind of holding spaces need to be willing to kind of lead the way and share a bit about what has impacted them, how they're doing with it, and being curious about what's going on for others. That's kind of the number one thing that I think that individuals can do in a company without starting to put other structures in place. Obviously, gestures like bringing in services, like Sanctus or other mental health services, show that you're committed to creating spaces where people can feel safe, if not with their colleagues. But hopefully, you can kind of join those two up in the best case.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, again, thank you so much for joining us. I could ask you questions all day, but unfortunately, or should I say, fortunately, we're just about to hear from Jodie. So thank you so much, and everyone will share the contact details for Sanctus after this webinar. So if you've got any further questions for Ben, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. So our next speaker, as I mentioned, is Jodie Crawford, who's the head of people at Red Bull. Jodie's got a background in publishing, digital, music, and FMCG before working at Red Bull. So she studied a master's in human resource management at Westminster University, and she's been at Red Bull for 2.5 years, working with approximately 270 people across the UK. So Jodie's passionate about employee engagement, well-being, development, and also the mental health of people at Red Bull. And she's going to run us through how they've coped with COVID, as well as how they're approaching their return to the workplace. So thanks, Jodie.
Hi everyone, morning. Thanks so much for having me today. It's already been super helpful for me to hear from both yourself and Ben, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I guess just to kind of start off, you alluded to this earlier, Felix, but I think regardless of whether people have been on furlough or not, this has been a really difficult period for everyone involved. And I mean, living through a global pandemic is something that I certainly never anticipated to live through. And I think people have had such a challenging time living through receiving difficult news, sadly in some situations deaths, but also the day-to-day that comes with working remotely, like childcare or caring for a family member, living with your parents again, spending 24/7 with your other half, or living your life on video calls. It really hasn't been easy. So although at Red Bull we haven't actually furloughed anyone, we are having people coming back into a role that they will be finding quite different to what they've been doing over the last few months, working from home and having that kind of face-to-face interaction, and even commuting in on the tube, which a lot of people won't have done for 4 months. So we've really tried to support our people as much as possible. One thing just to kind of say, we have actually got a really large number of field sales employees at Red Bull, and I know you briefly alluded to that earlier, Felix, but they've actually been back at work now for a couple of months, and we have kind of now got a bit of a mix of people who are back to normal-ish and going back out into the field and meeting customers where possible via social distancing, but we've also got a lot of people who are still working remotely, although we are actually now going to open the office from the beginning of August on a voluntary basis. As actually we've had a really high number of people wanting to be back in and using the office space, and I think really just to regain that sense of normality again and have that kind of separation between work and home, which again I know you mentioned earlier can be quite challenging. Of course, we've also got a number of people who are really concerned about being back and reluctant to return at the moment, which is obviously totally normal and okay and to be expected. So our focus really has been continuing to support people as we have done throughout the pandemic in the best way we can. And again, I think you also alluded to this earlier on, but our focus has really been on communication. So it might sound really basic, but it's so easy to get it wrong. And our philosophy has very much been around communicating until people tell us to stop. One way that we've been doing this is actually, previously we used to have a monthly meeting where we had a company update over breakfast, which was really nice because you got that face-to-face interaction, and obviously that hasn't been possible. So since March, we moved these to weekly and actually have been doing morning and afternoon sessions to make sure that everyone could attend regardless of whether they were doing homeschooling in the morning or had caring responsibilities. We really found that it was so important that everyone had the opportunity to have that live interaction. And because of course we're using a video channel to host these, a lot of chat happens in the chat box on the side, so you kind of get the normal feel of that culture that you have in the office in terms of those informal chats or celebrating when something's gone really well, which has been really great. This is also where we share really regular updates on ways of working, plans for returning to the field and to the office, and Ben kind of alluded to the fact that it was really important to make sure that everyone knew when they could expect an update. So this was kind of how we did this. And we also shared our outline thinking on things. So even if we didn't have confirmed dates, we really took people on the journey with us. So talking through what we were currently working on. So we had a team working on the return to the office. So where were we at? What changes were we making to the office so that people felt constantly informed? And I think that really has helped to maintain that psychological safety as everyone is with us and isn't kind of second guessing what might be happening next. Another thing that we've done really regularly in our communications is really talking about our mental health and well-being, and also highlighting that we recognise that people are in very different places. Some people may be feeling great and, as you said earlier, enjoying that kind of slightly slower pace working from home. Other people are finding it more difficult. So we've really tried to share resources proactively to support people for when things get a bit too much. We actually recently did a session in one of the breakfast meetings where the leadership team shared their what we called a COVID-19 roller coaster, and that was quite a visual chart, basically kind of highlighting the highs and where there was some lows, really kind of being very open and sharing that to really make sure that everyone in the business knew that it was okay to not be okay, to need to take some time off on annual leave, to make sure you're getting time away from the screens. And then we also asked the teams to repeat this within their own team meetings if they felt comfortable to do so, because we really found that having that open dialogue really encouraged people to support each other, for their manager to have a real understanding of how they were feeling, which has had really good feedback, and it's also enabled us to make some slight tweaks into the way that we're doing things by understanding and getting feedback from how people are feeling about that. We've also really been asking our managers to pick up with each member of their team, so whether they are field-based and already back out working in some cases. So again, not just sending them out and letting them get back on again, really checking in, making sure that they're doing okay, they're feeling comfortable, and any adjustments that need to be made, and also then talking to our office-based teams to really, again, check in how they're doing, how they're feeling about potentially being back at work, any concerns that they have as well, to really just make sure that that support is there, and again, that can get fed back to the team that are working on the office return. And I think it's really important to say that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and each person will have a really different feeling or personal situation that needs to be taken into consideration. And of course, Sanctus, we're really lucky to be partners with Sanctus, and them being able to react really quickly and provide those online sessions from really early on has been so helpful for us, and has been such an invaluable support. And again, the resources that Sanctus have been able to provide in terms of reading materials, that's something that we will share really regularly, again, to make sure that people are being proactive with their mental health, along with perhaps speaking to one of our mental health first aiders that we have in the business. So I guess just in terms of kind of practical steps that we've taken in terms of actual the physical return into the office, and what we did with the field as well, was actually creating a number of resources that people can look at to help them understand what measures are in place and really how we've made their return as safe as possible. So an example of this would be a decision tree. So I kind of went a bit old school, thinking about the magazines that you used to read, with the charts that tell you what your personality type might be, or what kind of person you might marry. And this was just kind of asking questions around your personal circumstances with yes or no answers, around whether you're classed as vulnerable or shielding, and what this means for your return and what support's available, if you have caring or childcare responsibilities, and also importantly, do you want to return right now? And if you do you still have questions, and who you need to speak to get those answered? And we also really made an effort to meet with lots of different teams to understand their personal views and concerns and ways of working, so that we were all super clear on what requirements they'll have going back into the office and what adjustments they'll personally need to make when using equipment. Because again, we have really different teams who do different things on a day-to-day basis, so we couldn't have a one-size-fits-all. And actually, the feedback on this has been really great, because people feel that they're being listened to and that things are tailored for their needs as much as possible. We've also done a Q&A with the kind of frequently asked questions made available, and shared the full detail of our risk assessment that we've done as well, and then held super small briefings on the return to the office, so that people can have that interaction rather than being in big groups where they might not feel comfortable to raise questions or concerns. And one other thing actually that we've done is we've recently made a video of what what the office now looks like, and a walk around to show what all the adjustments have made, very much in Red Bull style, featuring a BMX, which has been quite fun. And just one other thing that I personally really love is one thing that we've done with the signage in the office. So along with all the kind of regular things that we should include around keeping a 2-meter distance, washing hands, and basically following the rules, a key instruction on there is just to be kind. And this is so important generally, but especially as we start to go back into the office again, nobody knows how others are feeling, what their personal situation might be, how they're feeling about being back in, and it's just so important to be a good citizen. We've also made it really clear that we like and would expect people to give us our feedback on what's working and what isn't. We haven't done this before, we're learning too, and as much as we've gone away and done all the research and are confident in what we've put in place, I'm sure there'll be things that need to change, and we're very flexible on doing that to make sure that people are feeling happy. And I think, again, asking those early adopters, so the people that want to return in August, asking them to share their experiences of being back into the office, how it's been travelling back on the the tube is also really important. I know for me personally, I've been in a few times just to kind of check in on the progress of the office, and I was personally quite anxious about traveling on the tube again and just being around people again. So I think it was really helpful for me to go in, but also to share that with my team and the rest of the business to highlight that it's okay to not be okay about going in initially, and reassuring them that actually now I'm really excited to be back in and can't wait for it to be a bit more normal. And I think just finally, I think this isn't going away anytime soon. This will very much be the new normal. So I think it's really important that as we do start to transition into more people being in the office, that we're really continuing all the things that we've done throughout lockdown and beyond. And again, Felix, as you alluded to, I think there will be a rise in people working remotely, so not to lose out on any of the really great stuff that we've been doing through this period, so that people then kind of feel a bit overwhelmed again.
Well, thank you so much, Jodie. That was amazing. My big plan was to say, well, you know, I've got the one big lesson I took from your talk was X, but there's so much great stuff there. So thanks so much for giving us the practical view on the theory. I'm sure everyone's taken away something or many things that they can implement in their own office. And the only thing I'm not taking is the BMX. That's just a one-way ticket to A&E. And Ben, I also like to say thanks so much. I think we're all kind of aware of it, but the impact that this has had in the back of our minds, it's really great. That was one of the things I really took away from yours. So I know we've had some questions. So I'm going to ask them to the panel. Just quickly, yes, the session is recorded. There was one question around, have you made, I think this is for Jodie, have you made plans for a mandatory return to the office after August, or you haven't?
We haven't, no. So at this stage, we've got a really limited capacity of people that can be in the office, so 25% with 2 metre distancing, and also there's no need, it's been working really well. There's no need for us to be back right now. So if people want to be, then we're encouraging that if they're comfortable. But no, it's not mandatory and won't be for the foreseeable.
Fantastic. And I think this one maybe to either you, Jodie, or you, Ben. Ryan Briggs asked around, he's interested to hear thoughts around how financial education and financial well-being can be embraced alongside the physical, mental well-being in the organisation and the links between them. So Ben, maybe start us off on that one.
Sure, that's a really interesting question. I suppose the way that I would think about that is that if there is some kind of any support that is going to be relevant to a particular individual may help calm their anxiety or be supportive in this moment. And if people are in a position in their organizations to offer that kind of education, I would suggest that you let it be known, because there may be many people who would be having, well, I imagine many of us are having anxiety around finances right now. So I guess that would be about letting people know that that resource is there, or that those conversations can happen.
Brilliant. Anything to add to that, Jodie?
No, only to say that it's actually something that we're looking into as well at the moment. I think it's a really important topic and can often be quite a common thing that people have concerns about. So we're currently looking in. So I haven't got any tips to share yet, but I appreciate that it's a really important topic, and we're also keen to do more on that.
Brilliant. We've got another question from Emily Magnell, who's asked, Jodie, if you've experienced anyone asking for requests for longer term remote working, for example, people who want to move out of the city or maybe even move country.
Yeah, we have, and we do have a number of people who whose family are based in Europe. So we've been really flexible and allowed people to obviously go back and work from their family home if they wish to do so. We've had a few so far. To be honest, I anticipate we might have more. And again, I think it very much depends on the role. So if we've got managers who have big teams and they need to be in the office more regularly, then that's something that we need to take into consideration. But working remotely is going to be the new normal, and we very much want to retain our talent as much as we can. So if we can be at all flexible, we will be. And we've had a number of people saying, I no longer want to be in London, and I'm happy to do a 2-hour commute twice a week to be in the office. So yeah, we're happy to accommodate as long as they equally don't burn out with a long commute.
Absolutely, and I hate to be the guy doing this, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for. There was one more question that I think might make sense for you guys at Sanctus to pick up on separately, and I will put you guys in touch, asking for how to put together, essentially asking how to put together the business case for taking mental health seriously at this time, where there are so many other strains on budget. I'm sorry we didn't have time for that, Jodie. I know you have a good response for that, but I also know that the guys and girls at Sanctus are very well practiced in helping to navigate that business case. So I'll make sure you guys get in touch. Last thing to say is thanks so much for joining. Please do join us for another one of our Instant Impact webinars. We've got one upcoming on the 4th of August around improving inclusion in the workplace, and we will shortly release one on how far companies can legally go to drive diversity within their organization without going onto the wrong side of the falling foul of the law. Further resources, please have a look at our resources section at Instant Impact, where all recorded webinars like this can be found. And we've also recently released, as I mentioned at the beginning, our diversity hub, which is free and is all of the methodology that we've built over the years on how companies can use recruitment to drive diversity in their organization. So please, I hope you find that useful. I hope you found today useful. Thank you so much once more to Jodie and Ben.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.